Welcome to this episode of Profiles in a Life of Purpose. I'm thrilled to be talking to our guest, Joshua Ogaldez, who has a podcast that I am very fond of called The Intersection of Success and Spirituality, which speaks to me in all ways. And today we're going to hear directly from Joshua why he does the podcast and more about him in his life, which I'm curious and interested to hear. And I know you will be too. Hi, Joshua. Welcome.
Hey, welcome. I am absolutely excited and honored to be here with you today, Jan, and everybody listening to us or seeing us today. As you mentioned, I am the host of that podcast, and I'm so excited just to be here with you guys today.
Thank you. Thank you. The name alone just speaks directly to me. I think it is the best name of any podcast I've heard. I frankly wish I had thought of it. How did you come up with that?
Oh, that's incredible. So all my life, to a certain degree, I've been an achiever, and I can tell you that at a young age, there's even moments where winter break and actually summer breaks were actually really hard for me. And the reasons why they were hard for me was because I didn't like the idea of having nothing to do. And so I would literally give myself homework just so I had something to do. And so all my life I've been an achiever, but throughout life, as I've seen, been part of spiritual communities or part of a spiritual community, and then also seeking to thrive and have a vision and dream in life, oftentimes I've seen in the successful communities and the people that are achieving things, they'll look down on the people that are in spiritual communities, and spiritual communities portray successful people as almost villains. And so there's kind of this big gap between the two. And so long story short is there was a moment where I was like, I can't believe, is it possible to perhaps when you're called to do something great and significant, do it from a grounded place of being and do it from a place of abundance and just love within, where you're doing great things, but you're doing it from a place where you're rooted. And so seeing those two, that's kind of how the name kind of sprung up from that idea.
I love that. I think it's tricky because I also find that dichotomy, the duality of success and spirituality, often at odds with people's language. But if we can take the language out of it, people typically agree with the concept and with what they're doing in their behaviors. So I'm curious how you would define success.
Ooh, great question. Success, I think my fundamental way of success, I'll give you that foundation. I have a basic foundational idea of what success is. And then after that, I have three other definitions. But the first one is the foundational idea of success. One time I was interviewing a guest by the name of Alicia Britt Sholey. She's got a doctorate. She's a spiritual director. And she just struck me with her answer because I asked her something similar. And she said, success is to know that you are loved by the divine, know that you're loved by God, and also love him back and love the world back. And that fascinated me for a moment, because the picture that came in that moment was a picture of a child holding the hand of their father. And I think at the most fundamental level, that's a bit of our purpose. We were meant to be loved and to love. But springing from that rootedness and framework, success number one is, I think when I see life almost as a village. And within this village, there are people that are poets, there's people that are musicians, there's people that are engineers, there's people that are doctors. And sometimes, me as a speaker, there were moments where I looked at the whole idea of speaking and I said, well, maybe if I was a teacher or coach, I would be more impactful or this or that. But then I remember at this moment, it struck me, and I saw the power of speech. I tell this story of, I knew this one person that they had a family member commit suicide, and during this hard time, the thing that they heard over and over again was this one sermon. And so that just, for me, portrayed the power of speaking. And so within this framework of this village, success is being faithful to what you're called to do within that village. Some of us are called to create things. Some of us are called to create structure around things. Some of us are called to a number of things. So, number one, what's your part in the village? Number two is I think success is being authentic to who you are and living that to the maximum. And so, if you are created to, often say that your calling is the intersection between your greatest passion and strengths. And so, if you could really live that out, there's some people that are doctors, but they hate their job because it's their strength, but not their passion. There's some people that go to American Idol and they sing, and we're like, no, this is not good. It's their passion, but not their strength. So success is the moment that you really tap into that. And number three, I think at a certain level of success, it's living in such a way that the people closest to you, the people that see you on a daily basis, whether that be your kids, your siblings, your parents, whoever that may be, that when they look at your life, they say, I want to be like that person. Because every time I see that person, there's something bigger there. And of course, there's success within a mainstream perspective. And absolutely, I want to live and in the numbers and the accolades and stuff. But I think those four things are really what give me a picture of success.
Mm-hmm. I want to return to some of the points that you made within that, because within that description that you gave, there's so much richness about community and speaking and all. But I want to stay for just a minute on the other half of your podcast name, which is the intersection of success and spirituality. So how then would you define spirituality?
Spirituality. So the tradition I come from is I came from a Christian tradition. I also, to a certain degree, I also have some rootedness in the Jewish tradition. I have part ethnically Jewish as well. And so that's from where I spring forth. And I think that when I look at my picture of God, for some other people, they might think of it as the divine or might have other language to put it. But I once heard a quote that was by this author. Her name is Glennon Doyle Melton. And she said, be courageous because you are a child of God. Be kind because everyone else is too. And so at the basis of that, that's a spiritual tradition in which I came from. But the reason why it's not the intersection of success and religion, the intersection of success and Christianity, is because I converse with people from different traditions. And what spirituality does is it connects us to something bigger than ourselves, to a bigger story, to a bigger narrative than ourselves. And recently I was speaking to a neuroscientist by the name of Andrew Newberg for my podcast. And from a neuroscientist perspective, he was talking about how Sikhs, Buddhists, Christians, how people from diverse set of spiritual paths, from people even that are doing New Age, that just that right there was impacting their lives in a significant way. So in the broad spectrum of spirituality, I would say it's something that connects us to a bigger story or narrative than ourselves. And from my spirituality, if I define that, it's my connection to God and how that brings me closer to others. And within my faith tradition, we talk about shalom, which is the wholeness. And so we are agents bringing wholeness to the world with our love, with our kindness, with our goodness.
That's beautiful and so beautifully described as well. You had mentioned on your website that you were a speaker since you were age 5 when you began making cassette tapes.
Yes. Yes. And so I think there's always been, I don't know if you had a question on that.
Well, I was curious about how, because you were talking about calling, the question around that I want you to, and please take it in your own direction. But the question around that is, how did being at age 5 connect to what you thought of as your calling?
Okay, yeah. Yeah, that's a good question. I often tell people in this whole journey of figuring out calling, and I think calling can change in our lives. I don't think we always have one calling. And most times though there seems to be a thread. And I ask people, when you're looking for this and searching for this, I ask people, what brought joy to your heart when you were a child? For some people, they were artists. Other people, they would do a lemonade stand. Other people, they would get their stuffed animals and teach them. And for me, it was just an instinctive thing that I grew up in a home where I didn't, it was a bit of an interesting context. I didn't grow up with maybe some of the cartoons that some kids, or even just watching all the sports that most people do. Instead, my heroes, because my parents had constantly on the Christian television network, were just pastors, and so those are the people that I looked up to. And so at such a young age, there was just something instinctive about this draw towards communication, and not only communication, but communication in a way that would inspire people. And so as I look forward in my life right now, looking back, I can say it's just something that's always been there. And that sometimes there's such a great passion that I read books, and I constantly read that sometimes you need this amount of hours in order to succeed or that. And just communication's always been such a great passion that I remember throughout my whole time that sometimes I'd look at a mirror and I'm practicing for a speech, even without purposely, just in the spur of the moment, because I really wanted it to be great, not because I had pre-planned it. Because there was just this thing that instead of speaking from a sense of being forced, but it's just something that oozes from my heart. And so when I look back, I just see the fingerprints right there at a young age, pointing me to continually what I'm doing today.
Were there ever challenges along the way where you doubted
Yeah.
it?
Um, I would say that the journey of being a speaker is really hard, at least initially. You probably get an applause from the audience, but just when you're building anything, it takes work. One of my favorite quotes is by the speaker by the name of Josh Shipp, and it says, "It takes 10 years to be an overnight success." And Gary Vaynerchuk, who's a really well-known YouTuber and who's done phenomenal things and is a bit of a big personality with entrepreneurs, he talks about this one season where his dad passed on to him his wine business. And this was when YouTube was barely new. And so he hopped on to YouTube with this mindset that this thing was going to become big. And so he started a wine channel for the business. And he talks about for a long period of time, for several months, I think even over a year. You can double check the facts, those that are listening. But it was some span of time he started doing this, and nobody was watching. Nobody was really paying attention. And all of a sudden, through time, he started getting invitations for late night shows, for different shows. But with time, it took time to grow. And so I think in the journey of speaking, I think the two biggest things, I have never doubted the gift, but what has been difficult has been the road of manifesting or seeing the fulfillment of this thing or this dream, number one. And number two has been along the way of people that for whatever reason, whether it be just from their experiences or maybe just from the hurt in their own lives, or maybe for whatever reason, they don't believe in you. And I one time had somebody uh, that was a former mentor at an organization I was part of. They drew some mountains on a piece of paper, and they told me, this is your life as I look at your life. And this entrepreneurial path that you want to take, uh, I don't think you're going to be successful. I had a professor in college one time tell me, I think your dreams are pretty impossible. I think it's hard to really try to do that. And so I think what's been hardest has not been necessarily the gift, but is just the journey along the way. And I think the journey along the way is what makes what you're doing all the more amazing and powerful. But I think those have probably been the greatest challenges along the way.
Those are formidable. I in my way of thinking and in my work, I think of those really big challenges as also having the flip side of giving us our opportunities, and sometimes the greatest
Yeah.
opportunities. What did you find was your opportunity from those tough times? I cringed when you described those. Those would hurt. Those would really hurt.
Yes, I think that there's several ways in which those have impacted me. One is I think the continual journey as I'm going through success. I once heard by Greg Centineo, who's this serial entrepreneur who I've had on my show, and you were also at the event where he spoke, an event where he spoke when we were both there. And one of the quotes he says is, he says, listen to everyone, follow nobody.
Mhm.
And I think that's phenomenal advice. And so what I've come to see is when I'm giving people advice and their dreams are off the wall, or it seems insurmountable or crazy, I don't doubt them. What I tell them is this is my feedback as far as what's going to be difficult. And not only is this the feedback of what's going to be difficult, I say, where there's a will, there's a way. But this is my feedback as far as things you should think about. And so I don't off the wall discount anybody, because every single thing, the computer you're listening to or watching this right now, the iPhone, all of those were ludicrous ideas in the mind of somebody. And so when somebody has a crazy idea, I'm not quick to discount it. Instead, what I do is I give feedback. Well, this might be difficult, or you should think about this. But I don't think anything's impossible necessarily. And based upon your gifts and these things, there could probably be a pathway. And what I tell people is, you want to go a certain way. Look at the people that are living the closest lives to the life you want to live. And so, for me, as somebody that's interviewing people, as somebody that is speaking, I've studied the lives of tons of speakers, whether it be through interviews, whether it be through books, whether it be through some of their speeches, some of their events, whether it be by looking at their lives and analyzing, okay, this person did this, that person did that, continually, just to grow. And so I think that's been one great opportunity in midst of it all.
Mhm. So you aligned yourself with the positive
Yeah.
aspect of how you could get through it instead. Yeah.
Yes. Yes. So that's part of it. And I think another thing too is I've come to, at a certain level, just, I think, see people in hopefully a way that's dynamic, in which I have said things that are maybe not the best, and I've hurt people as well. And both of these individuals, I don't necessarily see them as bad people. So what I've seen is, within the whole sense of perspective, I've seen this as just, hey, this was maybe a low point, but as a person, they're not completely villains. And I think that's one thing that we miss sometimes, is that we villainize people for just a moment. And maybe my relationship with both of those people, I might listen to some things, maybe not, and that's okay. At the end of the day, I'm continually coming to the heart set of, you have to bless those people. That doesn't mean I have to interact with them continually, but in my heart, to have a healthy heart, to really live in the fullness of who I was created to be. I can't stay in the past. The more I stay in the past, the more my heart is stuck. And if my heart wants to thrive and soar, then I have to let go of those things.
That's an excellent point. And the other point you made that goes along with that, that I thought was extremely relevant, was that we never know what other pain people
Yeah,
have at the
yeah.
moment they're making their statement. What we all express is a reflection of our own lives and experiences. So
Mm, yeah,
what you said is true to that fact. What they said is based on their experiences, not yours, even though they're
absolutely.
responding to you. Um,
Absolutely.
so I understand your perspective very well.
Yeah.
Why did you choose podcasting as your forum? You're speaking. I understand. You described that.
Yeah,
Why podcasting?
that's a good question. I once heard John Acuff say, he's a writer, and I heard him say there are speakers that write and there are writers that speak. It's good to know which one of the two you are. And my undergrad major, one of my two undergrad majors was in actually English creative writing. And so I do write, but what I found is that speaking comes easier than writing. And so for me, as I was looking at this whole sense of wanting to communicate, I saw the beauty of podcasting was that I was being impacted by podcasts, by Entrepreneur on Fire. I also listened to Rob Bell, also listened to TD Jakes, and a number of different podcasts. And so part of the journey and the story was that I was on my way from my parents' house, which is an hour away from where I live. And in the process, it was like 5 in the morning. All of a sudden, the idea hit me. Why don't I do a podcast? And then I'm like, whoa. And then there's a divide between both of these worlds. And so what I immediately did was the first instinct was I wanted to seek some wisdom and feedback from people I trusted. So the first thing is I literally, this sounds crazy, but I tweeted Michael Hyatt on Twitter. I said, hey, I have this idea. Do you think this would work? And all he did was say yes. And that was one permission slip I needed. And then I asked one of my close friends, I'm like, what do you think about this? Both of them said, yeah, it'd be great. And so I think that's all I needed to really launch from there, because I like second guess myself a little bit. But that's a little bit of the story there. But going back to the story behind podcasting is I love just the sense of communicating. And I understand that I'm a speaker before I'm a writer, even though I do both. But speaking comes easier than writing. And number two is just a sense of self awareness. I think that some of us, like myself, I am not naturally a detailed person. I am not naturally a person of processes. I've come to embrace processes with time. I'm more of a visionary and a dreamer. Naturally, I'm also not good at like fixing things around the house and things like that. There's things, but there's other things that I'm self aware that I'm good at. And all my life, whether it be talking on the telephone or a conversation, people are like, you got a radio voice. You got a very great voice that is soothing, that is bold, and that in itself, I'm just drawn to it. And so I'm self aware of that. And so that was another reason I'm like, podcasting would definitely be a great medium to use this thing that I'm self aware about. And so for the people listening to us, maybe whatever your gift is, be self aware of it and use it, utilize it for good.
Yeah. The other thing that you just threw in there I thought was really significant. Did you know Michael Hyatt before you tweeted him?
I I didn't. I didn't. I would always follow his stuff, and I would tweet them and retweet things and favorite them. But I did know that in the past I had asked questions to him, just as somebody that followed him on Twitter, and sometimes he'd answer, and I'm like, I'm just gonna throw this one out there, and we'll see what goes down.
The point I want to focus on that for just a second is what a warm, authentic connection there is. You reached out with a genuine request. You were talking earlier about how you asked people who you considered mentors for feedback and got a challenge. You reached out to somebody who you admired, I'm assuming based on your conversation
Yeah,
about him.
absolutely.
And as a person of what I consider integrity because of the way that he responded to you genuinely. How wonderful is that?
Yes, and the other reason why I chose him too is because initially in my head, the niche audience or one of the most biggest audiences that I was going to focus on was helping high performers and achievers. And here is somebody that has a spiritual element to who they are, even though they don't project it on all their work,
Mhm.
but their audience is high achievers and high performers. And so I'm like, if anybody would know about this, I think he would know too.
Yeah, yeah. Um, I love that. So you mentioned your strengths. What values do you make sure that you're in align with as you do your work?
Values. Um, There's somebody I met by the name of Chris Hawley who has this whole assessment, which is fascinating. It's called Satiety. And what they do is, I've had him on the show too as well. And what he talks about is that all of us have different things that bring our spirit alive. And so some of us, we perhaps have a hard time exercising. But one of the things that brings our spirit alive is compassion, as said by this assessment. So what he says is, if that's you, then go to an elderly home and walk with the people from that home because your compassion brings your spirit alive to do an activity that otherwise perhaps you wouldn't be led to do. He also talks about how sometimes they'll do different assessments for organizations, and one of the biggest things that brings the spirit of alive of many of the people in an organization is playfulness. So one of the suggestions will be, hey, why don't you create a more playful environment wherever possible within your organization? And so I took that assessment, and my four things or four values or four things of my core spirit are: number one is imagination. Two is individualism, authenticity, and my fourth one was encouragement. And so I think at a certain level, instinctively, even before that, I want to foster a place where I create things, but also allow others to create things as well. I want to be somebody that looks at people, and whether you be somebody that is phenomenally well known or not, I want to look at you and look at your strengths and weaknesses and tap into the things that make you unique as a person, and then see how we can maximize that. Another thing is authenticity. I have a hard time when I'm not authentic. There's something within me that just feels off. And so, whether that be in my message, whether that be in my pursuits of what I'm doing with life, there's just something that's off when that's not there. And then the last one, I think encouragement. I want to foster, and wherever I am in life, want to encourage others. And so, to really live into the phone. So I think those are four of the things that I live by. Another value is just hard work ethic. I wake up every single day at 5 a.m. in the morning, and I have a routine that I have. And I usually have a bedtime that I shoot for, but there's this discipline and there's this work ethic. And that's something that me and my siblings, I think, all got from my dad. He's somebody that, to this day, he's working on his PhD. He's also a college professor and also a registered nurse and also in different management positions in the hospital. And so he's got a very big work ethic. And so that's something I value a lot, that my time is valuable and that what I want to do will take time, and that's okay to give it everything you've got.
That's beautiful. Really beautiful. Y- This year, you'd mentioned that we're taping in January,
Mhm.
and the episode will probably air in a few months, but you mentioned it's already a busy year.
Yes, yes. I actually, as of, there's a project I've been working on for almost a year, and essentially, the intersection of success and spirituality got picked up by the largest Christian television network in Spanish. And so essentially, I did essentially a Spanish version of the show. It's a bit different because it's a work that's more of a team than it is just myself. And so it's a bit different, but this is just overnight. It comes out literally right now. We're recording at the end of January. It literally comes out next week, which is February. And some of you guys are watching this probably months from now, or maybe even years from now. But it's a time with a lot of investment, a lot of focus, a lot of different things along the way. But it's a time that's been very powerful. And just as in English, also in Spanish, it's been a very, very great time.
Oh, congratulations. That's fantastic. Really exciting. What a huge audience you'll reach to help and influence. That's just wonderful.
Thank you.
I noticed also on your website that you offer soul coaching. Can you tell me more about that?
Yes. Yes. So I think all my life I've had the heart of somebody that wants to sit with people wherever they're at. And even in the first 8 interviews that I did for the intersection of success and spirituality, 4 of the first 8 people I interviewed started tearing up at some point in the interview. Oh. And the thing about wherever I go is I want to foster a presence where people can be honest, where people can be real and genuine. And I think that oftentimes I heard a quote from a friend recently by the name of Zach Chamberlain. He says, "It doesn't matter how successful you are, just continually ask yourself, how's my soul?" And so as somebody that is drawn to helping people along their way, I don't necessarily have or am part of a traditional institution or spiritual community. Right now, there is something I am a part of locally near where I live, but according to something more traditional, no. And so I think that's one more space where wherever people are at, some people, I recently had a friend who for a whole year, she had been dealing with something that happened in her life, and somebody that had passed away in their life, and they wanted to talk to me, and they said, "For over a year, I've been wanting to talk to you." And so there's this sense that wherever people are at, I love to sit with people and in the spaces of their hurt, pain, and create a space where we can grow, we can address things, because every part of our life is interconnected. What's going on in our heart will impact our career. What's going on in our career will impact our family. What's going on with our family will impact our lives in an exponential way. And so I think taking care of your soul, your spirit, what's going on inside of you, the thoughts, the mindsets, and just anything within is very, very important. So I just like to sit with people. What we were having last year was a 6-week program. This week, with the many things that we're doing, we're experimenting to see where we go with that. But I'm very excited to just sit with people. And also as well, beyond that, is just in different spaces. I mentioned I'm a speaker. And so that's one of the things that I talk about, is the intersection of you're doing something successful, but how can you live from a grounded place as well in the process of that?
In a few different ways, you've mentioned community, sometimes using that word and sometimes not.
Yeah.
How do you create a community? Do you have a way of, I know I'm not asking this directly because my mind is going in different directions with it. I see you impacting and touching a lot of different communities and people. Do you have a way of connecting and corralling all the people that you touch into one community in any fashion?
I think that goes back to the quote I mentioned earlier by Glennon Doyle Melton: "Be courageous because you're a child of God. Be kind because everyone else is too." And so whether I'm speaking in Spanish, whether I am speaking to friends, whether I'm speaking to people that are CEOs and entrepreneurs, at the end of the day, what I'm looking at is your humanity. And I think that's why I'm able to impact people from multiple levels. In addition, I think 2 things worthy of mention is, number one is I'm a bicultural person. So I grew up in a home where I spoke Spanish. And I spoke both English and Spanish. Every time I'd speak to my dad, it was in English. Every time to mom, it was in Spanish. And so within that, I grew up in a context where I grew very exposed to what it is, Hispanic culture. Also, I've explored different parts of my Jewish heritage. So there's other part there too, that I've explored as well. And so I have some people that are Jewish that are great friends, and also different communities I've been a part of. And so I think at the end of the day, I think my experience, especially that bicultural experience, has helped me see similarities between different cultures and see what's the best of each world. But I think beyond that, I think another thing that has perhaps given me a little bit of space to be able to connect with multiple people that have multiple different backgrounds, whether somebody very educated or somebody that might just be a child, is this sense that I think for whatever reason in different periods of my life, I felt rejected or a bit of an outsider. And so the way that formed me was that in the different spaces that I found myself in, especially in spaces of leadership, I always embrace the outsider. And so whether that be in, I think it was second or third grade, where I had a friend by the name of Brian who came from Canada and nobody would talk to him, I became his friend. Whether that be in 12th grade, where I had a friend by the name of Tyne who came from Vietnam. And the first few weeks were a little bit hard for him, and he became a great friend, and I learned a lot from him. And I taught him English, or whether that be later in college when I had a friend that was a Muslim and coming from a country from the Middle East that was blind. I've always been drawn to multiple different people. And I think part of that sprung from that rejection and says, I don't want to be that person that rejects somebody else. And so I really, beyond people's accolades or the suits or people's makeup, I see people's humanity. And I'm able to, with the individualist that I am, pick up the different cues of what I need to ultimately touch that point, which is their humanity.
Mm-hmm. As you do that, do you ever feel personal? I'm trying to think of the right word, pressure or maybe responsibility, because there's so many people that you do touch. It's such a widespread, diverse landscape of individuals. Does it ever feel like you're one person across a wide span?
I I don't necessarily feel pressure because I think there's this sense that things come. I think there's this natural sense that I think people that, if I'm speaking to like CEOs or entrepreneurs or those that type of audience, I kind of know the cues to pick up. And I think if the pressure comes, it maybe comes from the pressure that there's certain audiences that might look that you might seem like you have to impress. And I think there have been moments where, for instance, my Spanish is not like the greatest. I have two bachelor's degree and a master's degree, but there's people that are more educated than I am, and so I think pressure might come from that sense of doubt. But I think, if anything, what's been most helpful for me, not to say I'm perfect and never feel pressure, but is I don't ask myself the question, how can I impress people as much, or I try not to, or how do I look to these people? At the end of the day, I ask myself, how can I serve these people? And when I ask myself, how can I serve that CEO? How can I serve these kids? How can I serve these youth? How can I serve this particular audience that is speaking in Spanish? I think that takes a little bit of the pressure, and that puts me more on the idea of who is this person and how do I go far above and beyond to just simply be faithful? And at the end of the day, I think that's enough. Whether I get a big applause or not, I can, from a heart set, be able to say I did my best to truly love and serve this population.
And that's the part that I was curious, and I'm heartened is the word that comes to me, to hear that the answer that comes to you is that you feel that in your heart, because it's that question of how do I serve this group
Yeah.
that I was getting at, not the impress, because frankly that, I don't care about the impress part either, and it doesn't go along with authenticity. Um, but
Yeah.
the how do I serve? Yeah, that's the pressure that I was wondering if you felt, and you said no because you feel it in your heart that you have done what you can, and it's full. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
thank you for that. Thank you. What's something most people don't know about you?
Ooh, that's a good question. I have to pause for a moment. Um, I'm thinking deeply. Yeah, I don't know if there's much, because there's a lot with most people. I'm generally an open book, so maybe one thing that maybe one people might not know, there's others that probably do. Um, but yeah, I can't really think of much of things that probably people don't know. I think one thing I mentioned earlier was that I used to be a night owl, so I started at being a night owl, but I trained myself to wake up early. But with most things, if people ask me about my childhood, I talk about that. If people ask me about my weaknesses, I talk about that. If people talk about, so I don't think there's much. Maybe one thing might be is I'm an extrovert, and a lot of people think that I am always at the center of attention, but I've come to know with time that I actually do enjoy my alone time. And so sometimes I'll actually go to the movie theaters by myself just because it's a sense of rest after I've been with tons of people.
Yeah, that would be a surprising sort of fact because of how you project yourself and your energy. Yeah. Um, who You've had so many phenomenal guests. Oh my goodness. I encourage anybody listening who hasn't already been a follower of your show to go through your entire playlist. Who is a dream guest, dead or alive, that you would just really enjoy interviewing on your show?
Ooh, I actually, before I started my podcast, I interned with a podcaster by the name of Lewis Howes, and he is in usually in the top 100 podcasts. At times, he's even hit the top 10, and he's doing phenomenal with what he's doing. But he has a list of top three, and so from him, I learned I have my top three. His top three are Will Smith, The Rock, and Tony Robbins. My top three are probably along the lines of Stephen Curry. I just absolutely I think that it's incredible that somebody that doesn't have the physiological or physical build of some athletes has been able to do what he does. I think that's incredible. I'd also like to talk to TD Jakes. I think he's a phenomenal, very inspirational person. And I think also Rama Downey. I think she was in a series in CBS for a long time, but I think there's just something about her presence that's very soothing that I'm intrigued by. And so I think those are my top three. There's probably other people, but those are the people that at some point I think could be great to converse with.
Oh, I'd enjoy hearing you interview them, and I just assume they'll be on your show at some point. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Um, you you write songs as well, and I see a easel. Is it called an easel? A music stand, right?
It's a music stand. I do. That's actually a friend of mine, but I do love music, and the way that I engage with music is it's more of a spontaneous thing for me. For me, I when I want to rest, one of the things I mentioned is I like to watch movies and films. But another thing I like to do is I actually play the piano and guitar, and given I'm a writer, I love to just spontaneously just jam on those or just spontaneously write songs. Some of them are just prayer, some of them are just the way I'm feeling. But I think music is so powerful. And so uh, I very much enjoy it.
Would you ever put any of that out on one of your shows, do you think? Is that in your thoughts?
Um, maybe. The thing is, I'm self-aware that I'm an incredible. I love speaking, but as far as musically, vocally, uh, probably not. I'm self-aware of the strength and weaknesses. So I don't think singing is a forte, but I think the closest thing would probably be something along the lines of a spoken word with music in the background, or something along the lines of some kind of inspirational thoughts with music along in the background.
Ooh, that would be beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah. Are you creative that way in general? I mean, everything that you're describing is extremely creative, but how do you define your own creativity?
For me, I think the creativity is. I think we're all creators. The way that I express my creativity is mostly through whether it be speaking or whether it be through writing songs or just simply or writing blogs or whatever that might be. But I think all of us are creators, or all, even just interviews. I think there's an art to interviewing, and as I mentioned earlier, study the people that will give you blueprints for what you want to do. I've looked at Larry King and Oprah, and very much tried to study what they're doing. And usually, I think there's an art to being a good interviewer. So I approach that as an art. I approach just even sometimes just the way I'm interacting with people, or just everyday things. I love to surprise loved ones, whether that be family or friends. And I think there's even an art to that.
It's part of connection that you value
Yeah.
so highly, isn't it? That authentic connection. That's so much part of you.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Those threads, you mentioned the word thread earlier, and it's one I use as well. I look for those threads, and they're a
Mm.
constant through line in your language and your life. Um,
Yeah.
what haven't I asked you that you'd like to share?
Hmm. Ooh. I think I would. I think something along the lines of what I would probably have to say in relationship to God or spiritual communities. I think that there are people that I've reached that are maybe officially part of a spiritual community or maybe not. For some people that are listening, maybe they do yoga and that's their spiritual community. Other people, maybe they go to a temple or a church, or are part of some group that explores certain books together or practices. But I think certain people have completely turned themselves off to just the invitation to faith, or the invitation to explore this. And part of that oftentimes has been through insane wounds and insane just hurt. And so the biggest thing for me is, as a spiritual leader, forgive us for the times that we didn't necessarily care for you as much as we should have. Forgive us for the moments that we have said things but maybe not meant them. Forgive us for the moments in which you wanted our presence with you, but we let you down. Forgive us for the moments in which um, we failed you. We proclaimed something, but our lives proclaimed something else. Forgive us for the many ways in which, instead of being something that liberates you, we became a burden. And so I think wherever you're at, um, I would like to invite you to look beyond the hurt, look beyond the pain, look beyond that story. You don't have to stay in that chapter, and maybe you don't necessarily have to. I'm not going to tell you to go this way or that way. Maybe you'll find greater meaning in your life. And as I mentioned earlier with that neuroscientist, is maybe your whole world might be opened anew in a way that you never thought possible.
Beautifully said, and a beautiful invitation. Thank you.
Welcome.
How do you like to connect with people? I'll have your website and everything on the show notes, but how would you like people to find you?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm on Instagram, Joshua Ogaldez, Twitter, Joshua Ogaldez, Facebook. They're all the same thing. So you can
Okay.
find me there. Also via just, you can look online, joshuaogaldez.com. But especially during social media, I do like to interact with people. And so if there's ever something that you have a small question about, or even maybe a suggestion for a guest for a podcast, or maybe there's something that resonated here in this interview with you, and you're like, hey, I really want to let you know, and which gives me feedback so that we can continually impact people more and perhaps explore certain things we explored today. So, social media and also my website would be great.
Super. So we'll keep the invitation open and the conversation going.
Yes. So awesome.
Thank you
So
so very much, Joshua. It's been an honor and a delight.
an honor is mine as well. Keep up the great work, Jan.
Thank
And
you.
for all of you listening that listen to the show every week, you've done a good decision right now, and listening right now, and also following this journey with Jan, because she has a big heart, and her heart is to provide you with insights so that you could really live a life of purpose and far above and beyond your dreams. So, uh, thank you so much, and it was a great time being with you.
Thanks. Same.